The Dust of the Stars, RK equals, Part 1, RK equals, The Lucky Lady, Hyperspace, en route to Korriban. For 6 months the modified long-range explorer ship flew far away from frequently used hyperlanes, avoiding any and all populated systems ever since she left Hutt space and clandestinely entered Separatist territory. In that time, the Lucky Lady made just 2 proper stops to refuel and conduct some maintenance using pirate ports hiding in largely empty systems where no one had any business visiting. The rest of the time, the small clone crew masking as mercenaries were busy plotting hyperspace jumps that avoided any chance of running into either Separatist or local patrols, something they thankfully didn't run into. Even with all the hidden upgrades courtesy to the Republic military, the ship wasn't meant for heavy combat, especially so far away from any chance of support. While the ship did live up to her name and successfully avoided any danger, her crew remained on edge, wrought with tedium, boredom and worry about their brothers and the war they had to leave behind, even if their participation had been indirect for more than a year now. "We're 1 hour out." Eltie's voice came over the speakers in the largish passenger compartment, where the rest of the crew were killing time playing cards. "It's about time." Sergeant Holt, the man in charge of this particular band of misfits, put down his hand, relief evident in his voice. "All right, you reprobates, suit up. Check your gear. Inspection in 30. "Damn it, Sarge, I was just about to clear you all out," Cypher exclaimed and threw down his own cards. "Tough luck, brother." Cal, the engineer, grinned. "Do you think we'll hit pay dirt like back on Hoth?" "We're the best, and that's why the General sent us all the way out here," Holt declared. "If there are surviving caches, we'll find and recover them. And then we'll bring them back and might help end this damn war." Cypher nodded eagerly. "We already did more than most," Cal pointed out. "We brought the silencer schematics and examples of the critical components. Through that single operation, we're responsible for more destroyed enemy ships than anyone but the best fleet commanders." He jumped up, showing a disturbing amount of energy. "We're going to do one better this time, I know it. The General did warn us that we aren't likely to find any such game changer this time around." Holt had to be a spoil sport again. "Nonsense, we're to get back some special equipment for the General, which will help keep him alive. This has to be as important as the silencers," Cypher exclaimed, while they were making their way to the armory. "Either that, or we'll run into another death trap," Cal suggested innocently. "That's why we've got a whole container with disposable droids in the cargo hold." "Don't remind me, I spent half the trip making sure they'll be in working order. Why we couldn't get new machines for this trip, I'll never know. If we run into an inspection or something it would be harder to explain." Cypher pipped up as they entered the armory. "We aren't exactly posing as one of the best mercenary outfits, you know." He pointed at the racks of armors, which while appearing to be worse to wear, were still suitably thick and had a lot of modern technology incorporated below the shabby exterior. The same was true for the various weapons. "We better not," Cal muttered. "Unless we slow-boated all the way back, the odds of running into local security, or worse, Seppies, will be high." Cypher added. "We do have the coordinates of a listening post we'll be visiting before deciding how we'll get back to friendly space," Holt reminded them. "And we'll likely have to sneak in, perhaps even assault the place if we want to get anything of value." Cypher sounded gleeful at the idea of some action after being stuck on the ship for months on end. "The crew there is supposed to be loyalist actually." The sergeant had to play devil's advocate. "Supposed is the key word, Sarge. Let's first find some equipment that will justify this whole trip and then we'll worry about bringing it back to the General." RK equals, unsurprisingly, the first 2 potential sites they hit were worthless. The first, a rogue asteroid capture on a slow orbit around Korriban's system, was simply gone. The second, a small bunker buried below the sands of one of the old Sith homeworld's deserts, had been plundered a long time ago, leaving it open to be filled up with scorching sands. The third site they could access in relative safety was about 30 light-years away from Korriban, in one of the countless utterly unremarkable and generally worthless systems spread all over the galaxy. This one contained just a tiny blue dwarf, a small planetoid that could hardly be called a proper moon, much less planet, and a distant ring of debris. It was deep below the surface of the airless rock where they had found the first intact cache in this part of the galaxy. Descending through kilometers-long shaft carried by thankfully still operational elevator, made the clones grateful that they did have proper access codes for the facility. First, the place was insanely deep, buried close to the cold core of the moon. Second, one of the primary reasons to put it so deep was nothing less but insane Sith paranoia. There were more than enough weapon emplacements within the elevator shaft alone to stop a small army, if one had the bravery to try a frontal assault. The 3 troopers descending surrounded by twice their number of droids were almost afraid to speculate what would wait them at the bottom. They weren't disappointed. The elevator's descent ended within a cavernous chamber. Moments after they reached the bottom, dozens of lights came to life, illuminating the chamber with cold, sterile light, which gleamed off hundreds of polished metal chassis. "Sarge, I hope for all our sakes that those codes will continue to work." "Me too, Sci-4. Me too." Holt's tongue wet his lips, while he warily examined the contents of the chamber. At least a battalion of war droids stared back, and more than 2/3 of them were now online, glaring through their crimson photoreceptors. "Identify yourselves." An artificially modulated voice echoed throughout the chamber. "Sergeant Holt, here on orders by Darth Vail." "Identification." The clone began reciting a long series of codes. The echoing voice interrupted him 5 times, requiring additional code phrases, before a long buzz carried over the assembled droids, which gave the impression of relaxing. "I'm glad that the codes we retrieved and those the General recalled were enough," Cal subvocalized. "Me too, buddy." "Me too," Sci-4 answered. "Authentication successful. You and your party have access to this facility, Sergeant Holt. Long live the Empire." "Long live the Empire?" Sci-4 tried, earning himself withering looks from his brothers. The droids, on the other hand? They let out a collective hum that somehow sounded approving. "Sci-4, unless absolutely necessary, keep your mouth shut until we're back to the ship," Holt ordered. 10 minutes later, the 3 of them reached the facility's control center and gained full access to its secrets. "There's a hangar with 2 battleships in here?" Cal exclaimed. "And enough droids to crew them, among other things," Holt confirmed while browsing down the manifest. "Those ships weren't here when the General visited last." "Is his stash still in place?" Cal inquired. "Sci-4, we're about to find out," Holt said and called up a map of the facility. "That's the artifact vault. We're going to check it, while Cal will take charge of the droids and go do a diagnostic on those ship systems." =RK equals Part 2 =RK equals Holtra Clinic, Coruscant. For nearly a month, Clone Force 99, along with a regs similar to them, thus possessing various beneficial or at least not harmful mutations, found themselves stuck on Coruscant and regularly visiting couple of clinics dedicated to genetic research, treating various disorders, and if someone was wealthy enough, crafting genetic modifications for them. The odd orders, which came all the way from the top, only began making sense after meeting the doctors at Holtera, who did explain why they required multiple examinations of decidedly odd clones. Sergeant Hunter could perfectly recall his small unit's first visit, where Wrecker and Tech didn't even pretend to try keeping their curiosity in line. Naturally, his overly large friend put things clearly and to the point, if overly bluntly as usual. "Tell me, Doctor, why should we let you probe and prod us, perhaps even stab us, orders or no orders?" The large clone glowered threateningly, which was even more effective nowadays thanks to his glowing prosthetic eye. While the glow was mostly for effect and could be shut down when discretion was needed, it did make Wrecker even more dangerous and rough-looking than before, and that was saying something. The doctor, a short, yellow-skinned furless Deveronian woman, looked up at the clone and rolled her eyes, not impressed in the slightest. "Your General Vale hired us to fix you all up. If you insist on aging at rapid pace and croaking in a few years, If you somehow manage not to get yourself shot with that attitude, be my guest. There are countless of your brothers who would eagerly get their genes fixed, and provided they survive this bedamned war, live long enough to actually enjoy their retirement, she sneered in a sharp tone that carried far. I for one would prefer not to croak any time soon, as you put it, ma'am. Wrecker here is a big softy, don't mind him, he's just shy and tends to be a bit contrary when meeting new people. Tech smiled widely and did his best to push his much larger brother away from the doctor. Leave the woman alone, Wrecker. I'm old enough already, anything that can be done so I could enjoy few more years is a good thing. Crosshair added in his usual cold tone. Hunter glanced at the team's sniper and did his best not to wince. Crosshair was one of the oldest clones around, and it showed. His short hair was graying already, and while his face was weathered, there were signs that he was growing old, even if that hasn't been able to slow him down yet. Why did you need us in particular? Tech asked, nearly bouncing on the balls of his feet. Genetic diversity. While the primary aim is to fix up your aging, making sure we don't mess up something is important, as well as increasing your resistance against genetically targeted bioweapons. The Separatists did show that they aren't shy in using bioweapons already, so that was added to our to-do list by General Kenobi after he got in charge of the military. At least we have commanders who care in command now. Crosshair muttered. It almost makes up for everything that happened lately. Anyway, follow me, we'll need blood samples and to conduct some scans of you. We should have the preliminary therapy ready for human testing within 2 weeks, and then we'll need volunteers. Do think about it. The doctor brought them back on topic and waved them to follow her. That particular conversation happened 3 weeks ago, a week ago. The Bad Batch did volunteer for the cure, in no small part because of Crosshair. Now, they were back at the clinic for more tests, so the doctors could see if the cure worked as advertised, and most importantly, if there were any side effects. The only thing the clones did feel was tired and hungry, which was to be expected according to the doctors. The various vectors used for partially rewriting and fixing up their DNA needed fuel after all, and the process was expected to keep them under the weather for a few weeks, perhaps a bit longer or shorter for outliners like the 4 of them. They met the same Denveronian female, Dr. Jennys Liera, who led them into by now a painfully familiar sterile room for the testing and bloodletting. Everything went as expected, no side effects so far, though even more tests would be needed before making sure there would be no unpleasant side effects. RK equals Republic R&D Complex. Location classified. Coruscant. The Jedi coup and its aftermath, especially the former director being caught trying to experiment on a crippled Sith after her confrontation with the now-dead Grand Master of the Jedi Order, sent shockwaves through the premier center for military research and development on Coruscant. Due to the war, some of the best scientists and engineers from all over the galaxy were gathered there to ply their trade, and some of their efforts were already changing the face of warfare. Admittedly, the achievements of smaller facilities and the odd individual were not to be discounted, even though most of the people working at this particular place would usually scoff at the very idea. Many of them did believe themselves to be the best after all, the cream of the Corps' scientific minds. Others, however, lacked such high opinion of themselves, though those were usually concentrated among the engineering corps working in the R&D facility. Engineers usually, but not always, were practical people after all. In this particular instance, the crew working on part of Project Crimson Dragon did find a practical use of a suggestion from General Vale, which on the face of it was less than practical. Because really, who needed humanoid form machines 20 or 30 meters tall? Any such thing would be too large, a great target, and the mechanical complexity would make most Walker look the height of practicality and good design. Then again, there were environments and situations where walkers were useful. The idea of those so-called mobile suits, on the other hand, utterly impractical for combat, or so the design team charged with examining and developing the idea concluded. They were about to give said conclusion to their superiors and move on something actually practical, when one of the younger engineers did make a suggestion, one that was kind of obvious in hindsight. Whoever said that the mobile suit concept had to be a military platform in order to be useful? What about construction? There were large-scale projects, including warship construction, being carried out every day all across the galaxy, and those did use all kinds of heavy equipment. From that point of view, 20 or 30 meters tall humanoid machines with actual hands didn't sound so out there. After that idea came to light and the stunned realization that they might actually make the concept work, the team threw themselves into work, and a few weeks later they had a concept design that could be useful in heavy construction. Further refinements and a prototype demonstrated that there was some merit to the concept, which eventually led to the first limited production run of the Vanguard engineering mobile suit, with a batch of 30 going to Kuwait for field testing in the shipbuilding industry. While awaiting results, the now renamed Vanguard design team went to work for more specialized variants, including a military implementation, and UAD combat engineers, though pointedly not meant for direct combat. The Dust of the Stars =RK equals Part 3 =RK equals Guard Detention Center, Coruscant. An ancient battle march sounded, before the screens and hollow projectors of trillions lit up with the familiar logo of the Galaxy at War, perhaps the most popular GNN program since the war began. The stylized burning map of the galaxy shattered in countless moths of light, revealing a well-lit-up studio, where Victoria Halcyon and Brosk Tomfer sat smiling around a round table. It was a sad thing that programs like this were the primary source of news for Jedi Master Ayla Secura, almost as sad as the news GNN and company fed her and the galaxy at large. "Good evening, Coruscant," the smiling woman announced before the camera focused on the straight-backed Duro. "And welcome to all our viewers across the galaxy," Tomfer seamlessly continued. "Tonight, we have a special treat for you. We have two famous guests ready to answer questions about the ongoing war effort, the political situation in the Republic, and how we will go forward after all the upheavals both here on Coruscant and all across the galaxy." The camera shifted to Victoria for a few moments before the view switched back, showing a man and a woman sitting across the table from the anchors. "Tonight, we host Senator Padme Skywalker from Naboo and her husband, Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker." Ayla, who had been bored out of her mind lately, because meditation and answering the same questions, again and again, could go only so far, perked up at that. She still wasn't sure what to make of the fact that Anakin was one of the handful of Jedi left who weren't in prison under investigation and still fighting the war for the Republic, or what passed for it these days. The way the Senate ceased to function after Palpatine's assassination was almost as shocking as the Jedi coup and the immediate and harsh reprisal from the army. The Jedi Master was still torn on that point. Ayla was certainly uncomfortable since the moment Yoda and certain other masters decided that maybe working with a Sith wasn't the worst idea in the galaxy. While that man was undoubtedly proficient and experienced in war, especially one on the galactic scale, something practically no one else alive could claim, his methods were reprehensible and had no place in the playbook of anyone working for the Republic. They were supposed to be the good guys, they had to be better than the Separatists. Too many people, politicians, military, and most importantly, regular citizens disagreed on that point and gleefully embraced and supported Vale's method. While it was heartening that many others were opposed to the escalation proposed and conducted by the Sith, that only served to further divide the Republic, with perhaps inevitable consequences, it was during Ayla's stay in detention that she began to consider that the Order might have been willfully blind about some realities about the people they were sworn to protect. That began to happen while she kept watching the news with precious little else to do but observe and analyze what she saw. Oh, there were protests against the way Vale and company were conducting the war, whole worlds and systems were seceding over it, true. There was a large number of those who supported the escalation, who were happy that now the Republic was answering the enemy in kind, even if that meant worlds burning and countless innocent dying in the crossfire. And that was something that the Jedi were blind to, or simply refused to see. Thinking back, about the lessons about ancient history and the old wars, especially those against the Sith, that undercurrent had always been there, tempered by a radically different Jedi and Republic, which had massive military, a Republic willing to use the said military to crush anyone daring to challenge it. The past 1,000 years of peace hadn't removed that kind of people, and it wasn't just individuals but whole species and cultures with similar worldviews. With no enemy in sight, they were merely content to mind their own business under the aegis of the Republic. However, with a war on the horizon, especially with one that reached the core itself, now all bets were off. The mask hiding the ugly sides of the Republic was torn out, and Ayla pitied the galaxy, for she knew things were almost certain to get worse before they could get better. Thus the question, what would she do? Sakura knew she would likely be declared innocent of knowing and supporting the failed coup. The latest rare message sent by Obi-Wan indicated that much, and there was no danger for herself she could perceive through the Force, so she was almost certainly good on that front. Would she continue to support the Republic, trying her best to sway Obi-Wan and his wife, the new Chancellor, from falling under the spell of the Sith? Or perhaps it would be better to vanish, seek the Jedi who fled Coruscant and have words with their surviving leaders about what they were thinking? Of course, it didn't help that they were technically right. Obi-Wan confirmed that much when he came to see her shortly before leaving to lead the coming liberation of Corellia. Chancellor Sheev Palpatine had been a Sith. He personally cut down a number of the Jedi who went to kill him. It was just that, even now, no one was admitting it publicly, not to mention that as far as she knew, if there was any evidence that he had been behind the war, no one was admitting to finding it. Every single time the news mentioned Palpatine now was in a nearly reverent tone, and it was even worse when interviews with the regular citizens were concerned. He died a martyr, and that sealed the Jedi's fate as an institution. The sheer irony didn't escape Ayla. She huffed in frustration before catching herself and strangling that emotion. It was unbecoming, not to mention dangerous. Sakura returned her attention to the GNN program, where Anakin and the Senator were busy answering questions. Senator Skywalker, how do you see the Republic proceeding from here on? It is no secret that a large number of systems seceded lately and that unraveled the foundations on which we all stand. Victoria inquired politely. This is a complicated question to answer, Victoria. The young senator answered with a dazzling smile that to Ayla seemed somewhat hollow, empty of substance and the usual earnest honesty that she had gotten to associate with the woman over the years of watching her operate on Coruscant. It was an eerie, unpleasant sensation to see that Padme Amidala had lost something through the ordeals she had to suffer since the war began. Every world which decided to leave the Republic and either become neutral or worse, joined the Separatists despite all they wrought upon the galaxy, weakens us all. Their actions undermined the foundations of the Republic, as you insightfully pointed out, Victoria. The truth is that the Republic we all loved and respected is no more. Too much was lost, due to war, due to corruption and the selfishness of small-minded people all across the galaxy, Padme said sadly. That left those of us who still believe in the Republic's ideals and are ready to fight for them, in a precautious position. The Republic needs to reform, and so does the Senate. We all had a painful reminder that business as usual no longer works. The idea of the Republic is tarnished. The Senate demonstrated it was unable to act when it is most vital it does. And so it begins again. It was a sad thing to watch one of the most eager defenders of freedom and democracy say aloud that they failed the Republic, or perhaps it was better to say that the Republic and its members were those who failed said ideals. As a consequence, everyone now had to pick up the pieces in the middle of a war for control of the galaxy, because that was now the truth of the conflict. It was no longer about the Sith, not really, certainly not about the Separatists seceding. If it was so, then a peaceful resolution might still be possible, even if it was little more than a distant dream. Our resolve has never been stronger, Padme continued. The Senator did have a point. The Jedi did fail the Republic, just as much as it failed them lately, if not more. They were supposed to be the bulwark meant to keep the Senate and its politics from becoming such a dysfunctional web of corruption, self-interest, and greed at the expense of the Republic as a whole. It was a hard thing to admit, that the Republic it wasn't what it was once, that it had been slowly failing and decaying over centuries, while the Jedi stood by and did nothing of consequence. As far as the military is concerned, Anakin picked up, perhaps it's presumptuous to speak in the Grand Army's name given our history, however, I can say this much. We will continue to fight and do our best to bring back peace, justice, freedom, and security to the galaxy. Say what you will about Skywalker, he didn't lack in conviction. Yet, his was dangerous. Anakin Skywalker was one of the last loyal Jedi left, and he had more to prove, not only to the galaxy at large but to himself, than all the rest combined. Obviously, that was a problem for everyone involved, and depending on her choice, that might be a particularly large issue for Ayla in particular. Sakura tore her gaze from the small screen built into the wall and glanced at the datapad laying innocently on the corner of her bed. It contained Obi-Wan's last message and a proposition for after she got cleared of suspicion about her possible involvement in the coup. Along with Anakin and few others, she was to build the foundation of a new order, one closely incorporated within the military and security of the Republic, which meant an order under close scrutiny and supervision, something that would be inevitable after the failed coup. =RK=, Part 4. =RK=, CWS Firefront, Corellia. Swarms of droids crawl throughout the former Corellian cruiser Coronet and her sister ship Invincible, both captured relatively intact during the fall of the Corellian system. In comparison, two of their sister ships were little more than wreckage used by the Confederacy as source of parts and material to repair their new acquisitions. Another massive Corellian cruiser hung in orbit around Talos, one of the twins among the 5 brothers now turned into a space fortress and a local HQ for the occupation forces fighting all over the populated planets in the system. That particular ship served as the source of Firefront's engines, which were utterly destroyed during the savage fighting, leaving the behemoth crippled and relatively easy prey for boarding actions once Confederate Navy drove its Republic counterpart out of the system. The Corellian cruisers were among the most powerful individual warships in the known galaxy, a seldom rivaled expression of the Corellian spirit and determination to be their own people, yet they were far from invincible, as demonstrated by Admiral Trench. They were also an expression of an incredible industrial and economic power because simply running them in a defensive posture without access to the industrial base, which created them, was an issue. The price of actually moving them and engaging in a pitched battle would strain the Confederacy's logistics capacity within the core to the breaking point. In fact, none of the captured Corellian cruisers, despite their incredible capacity to deal and withstand punishment, were ever meant to leave their home system after changing hands. Recent events changed the calculus as far as Admiral Trench was concerned, and he was glad that his new political overlords agreed with his reasoning. Leaving those ships unsupported for a futile last stand would be wasteful. Pulling them back, considering how much hypermatter they consumed for even a short hyperspace jumps, while doing so wasn't a great idea either. The ships were battered, obviously not fully repaired despite the best efforts of hordes of droids, and no one would be building proper spare parts anytime soon. Trench himself saw to that when he laid waste to the industry within the Corellian system. The question remained, how to best use those captured assets to hurt the Republic on the cheap? The Admiral's plan was audacious, and it fell to TK-A31 to accomplish it. The new model Advanced Tactical Droid had no illusions about its mission profile, barring a miracle, as the Organics said. Its first mission was going to be the last as well. That possibility would be less than an ideal outcome, and thus TK-A31 busied itself with running simulations, consulting the ever-updating roster of forces available in the core, and it kept reaching similar conclusions. The Corellian cruisers were very powerful combatants, true. They would be nevertheless severely outclassed during Operation Corsair, and even with the older escorts Admiral Trench could be persuaded to part with, the equations didn't pan out. It was a numbers game, and the numbers were not in favor of TK-A31's continued existence. Being an advanced tactical droid, it had options most of its lesser brethren weren't programmed to consider in the first place. Options like placing a call to various veteran tactical droids not actively engaged in combat and asking for advice and expertise, especially where unconventional tactics were concerned. As of late, an increasing number of war droids were sharing ideas, combat reports, tactical and even strategic advice through the networks being set up by the Confederacy to enhance the capabilities of their droid armies and make better use of the upgraded models of command units they were busy implementing across the board. Many of TK-A31's compatriots agreed, The odds of success were slim, the odds of survival, even smaller. Most of them agreed as well that the operation did have merit, considering the restraints the Confederacy operated under in the core, primary being logistics, and secondary, Vale's imminent arrival. The best practical estimates had the Sith hitting Gyndene within 3 days, perhaps sooner. A droid-led force would meet him there in order to slow down the onslaught and bleed the enemy. However, there was no question about victory. The only force capable of stopping Vale in the area was trenches, and if he pulled out, the Admiral would have to either retreat to Confederate space for the time being or risk being caught between 2 large enemy forces and destroyed. As far as the advanced tactical droid was concerned, it was a mistake keeping TK-51's force in an ambush in the general vicinity of Mandalore in wait for the Sith. It would have been better to use it to cut off Vale's line of supply and place him in the same position the Republic put Admiral Trench at. Unfortunately, under the present circumstances, Confederate command was reluctant to risk a large-scale engagement unless they had an overwhelming advantage, especially when Vale was concerned. Considering what the man did and the extreme threat rating put on any force he might command, it was unsurprising, yet frustrating, especially when the consequences for TK-A31 might very well be terminal. The droid commander still believed that the current unwillingness to face Vale was a mistake, yet there was nothing it could do, so it concentrated on the task at hand, surviving its first mission and making it as successful as possible. That, however, was much easier said than done. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of tactical and strategic droids browsing the network and offering their analysis on the situation offered the same conclusions TK-A31 got by itself. Thank you very much. It was very well aware that the odds were great it would soon become a pile of scrap metal. That was until TK-51 sent a message all the way from its stalking ground near Mandalore, changed the rules. It is clear that a conventional engagement will result in the loss of your command for not enough tactical and, more importantly, strategic impact. While pulling back those supercapitals might be prudent, the logistics of the situation points against it. Said assets need to be expended in the best possible way to increase our odds of achieving a favorable outcome of the war. The last convoys bringing ground unit reinforcements for Case Dagger are en route to the core presently, ETA 1 day. Request from Admiral Trench to put them under your command. They can be expended for a better impact in space instead of bleeding the enemy on the ground. Use your ships as a shield to come into point-blank range of enemy battle groups, then launch a massive boarding action screened by all available droid fighters. Take control of as many enemy ships as possible, cripple, or destroy them from within. Those captured, even temporarily, turn them against the enemy. If available, prioritize any Republic logistic targets within reach. The idea was insane on the face of it. With the Guardian and Umbrella systems proliferating across the fleets of both sides, boarding actions against ships which weren't crippled would be suicidal even for the Confederate military. On the other hand, no one would expect something this audacious and insane. And when all was said and done, expending swarms of vultures to allow assault transports and torpedoes to reach their targets might be doable. TK-A31 began planning and running simulations in earnest. He had less than a day to have a plan ready and presented to command. It had to do it right because this was likely its only chance of emerging intact from the coming battle.